This is Mark with the Path of Zen, and today we have Forrest. Forrest is a 20-year veteran with Zen practice, and he's going to be telling us about his experiences with Zen and where he thinks Zen is going in this modern world. Greetings, Forrest. You're most welcome on the channel.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
So, can you give us a little bit of your history? What initially got you interested in the Path of Zen?
Well, it's hard to say what exactly it actually was, but I would say there was a moment that I read something and it kind of sparked. So what it felt like actually was it felt like there was something in my chest that was related to a feeling I had had my entire life growing up, which was a feeling like I was kind of missing something, like I was just maybe one step behind reality. And so I read a koan. I forget what inspired me to even find it, but it was online somewhere. And I think the koan was, "What was your face before your parents were born?"
Mm.
And I read that question, and I was like, "What?" It's a very strange question, but it made me feel something. And so I was like, "Oh, what is this feeling?" And I intuited that feeling was somehow related to my um, existential quest for some sort of something that felt missing, right? That I later found out we have a phrase for it, right? The way-seeking mind.
Yes.
So I investigated that feeling. I investigated where it led to. It led me up into the mountains of where I was living at the time, near Santa Cruz Mountains, at a Zen center called Jikoji. And I went there, and they didn't have a resident teacher at the time, and so it was just one of the caretakers who was there, and he said, "Oh yeah, I was like, what's this all about?" Right? And I read this thing, and he's like, "Oh, we don't really do koans, but we sit." And so it's like, okay, well, he's like, "Oh, come here, I'll show you." So he showed me how to sit on the mat, and it's great. I'm probably like 19 at this time, and so I sat, and he's like, "Oh man, you're really good at this. Like you're a natural. Why don't you come back in 2 days? We're doing a 4-day retreat, and you're so good at this, you'll just do great. So why don't you just come back and sit with us?" And so at the time, I wasn't really doing much, and so I just was like, okay, well, I guess I'll come back in a few days, and that's what I did, and that kind of started the whole journey for me.
That's really amazing. Now, this was up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I actually spent some time in the Santa Cruz Mountains in about I think about 1994, up in a little place called Vajrapani. Did you ever make it there, up that in that area?
I think
right around Boulder Creek.
Yeah, I definitely stayed out in Boulder Creek for a while. I don't know that I made it to Vajrapani. In that area, I did spend a bit of time at Jikoji after that, and I did do a stayed at Land of Medicine Buddha for a while, which is a beautiful property up there.
It is extremely beautiful there.
Yeah.
So, what then happened after that? Did you? Obviously, you continued with your Zen studies after the retreat.
I felt like, it's a funny thing, right? Being a layperson, it's like part of me wanted to go. I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Japan. I wanted to go off on any mountain, pick a mountain with a place at it that I could go and sit and practice. And I had this really, what's the word, like glorified kind of view of the practice and monks and the traditions and all these things.
Can you describe that back then? What kind of glorified view do you think?
Enlightenment was just the coolest thing. Everyone else, like, what are you doing with your life if you're not trying to get enlightened, right? And for me, it was almost like I had two lives, right? I had the normal life where I was a struggling young person trying to figure out what he wanted to do and go to community college, and how do I move out of my parents' house and stuff like that. And then I had this other spiritual life where I was going to weekly sits with a group in San Jose, California, and I would try to go to retreats when I could, and I kind of had this idea of like, if only I could just go devote my life to this thing, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be everything will be okay, right? I actually tried one. It was around New Year's, and I told my parents, I was like, I'm going. I found this place in Japan that fill out application, and you go I think during the summertime, and then you stay. And once winter hits, basically you're in there, like you can't leave. And I had this whole thing planned out. My mom talked me out of it. She's like, Forrest, you're a little too excited about this. I mean, so, but that's kind of the idea I had, was that, and for a long time after that, actually, I had this idea that that I needed to somehow leave my life behind and go fully pursue this Zen thing, to get some sort of peace, or to figure out what that feeling was. But I was living a regular life for the whole time. I ended up getting married in my 20s. I had kids. And so there's this part of me here, and then there is this part. So every now and then, once a year, I would go do a retreat, or a big part of my story, that I feel is strongly related, is also using medicine, like cactus or mushrooms, or things like this, that are mind altering psychedelics that I feel like are, for me at least, related to a similar investigation into my nature. And so I would, have this kind of two parts of my life, and my wife at the time had no idea, right, what this was all about. Whether
was she a practitioner, or
oh,
would you ever?
absolutely not. No.
Okay.
No, she went to sit with me one time, but
okay.
Yeah.
I in my own life, I found that a lot of people compartmentalize, or they partition their day-to-day life and then their Zen life.
Yeah.
And it's like their day-to-day life is the dream world, and their Zen life is the absolute spiritual world. And it's very sacred to them. They do not like anybody mucking with their Zen life. They want to wear their robes and be and behave in a particular way. And then they want that very distinct and different from their normal life, their day-to-day life, which I always found schizophrenic.
Yeah, it's challenging. I think there's something to learn there when we attempt that. Certainly not the case anymore for me. But yeah, I mean, it was really informative. That practice in the beginning was, I just kind of kept at it, despite what else was going on. And I was blessed to have a teacher out of a lineage that was very well suited for me.
Can you tell me a bit about that teacher?
Yeah. So my direct teacher's name is Angie Bosavane. And she practiced the Jikoji back in the, I want to say, late 60s, early 70s, when her teacher, Kobun Chino Roshi, came over from Japan. The story goes that he was invited by Shunryu Suzuki, who basically said, these people are crazy. I need help. He has send reinforcements. Kobun, I never met him. Unfortunately, he passed away very tragically years before I joined the Zendo. And but from what I gather and what I received from the teachings, or from Angie, is that he was very much more concerned with the meat of or the most beautiful aspects of what Zen can do for us, rather than the ornamental aspects or the outward facing aspects of what it seems like Zen is. And this was evidenced by his almost absolute refusal to ever teach ceremonies, or to hold. I mean, his students would, because back then, especially from what I've heard, because I wasn't alive yet, people were really wanting to know a lot about not only the practice, but even more so about Japan and about the teachings. I mean, it's such a different culture, and so people wanted to know, well, how do we chant this, and how do we do this kind of ceremony, and they wanted to know the forms, right? Yeah. They wanted to kind of know, okay, show me the form. And Kobun just was notorious for not doing that. He didn't do transmissions. He didn't do all this stuff. They basically had to pull things out of him. And a lot of his students ended up actually going to Japan to temples to learn some of those traditions, so they could carry those forward. But for him, it always seemed like he had very little concern for that, because to him, he saw the Western society is very different. And so when he got here, he looked around, he said, okay, this is I'm not going to do what we're doing in Japan out here, especially on the West Coast. These people are very different.
That's so, what Shunryu Suzuki also said. He wrote that he he saw that the Western society was very liberated from this very staunch and very locked in cultural aspects that Japan, you just can't get away from it.
Yeah.
It's just nailed in.
Still.
Yeah, and it's still very much that way. And this is what a lot of people don't get about Japan, but it's yes, it's like with some of them go to Japan and they go, oh yeah, you're right. It's just like it is just lockstep in culture. You cannot break it. But Suzuki saw a chance to break away from that and did, and that's when he started to teach his own version of Zen away from the Soto Shu, which he said was liberating. He wrote that in his book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was liberating. And I believe that your Kobun Chino also shared that view. He was liberated from the Soto Shu. And a friend of mine by the name of Alex, he actually went to Japan for many years and studied with the Soto Shu. And the way that he describes it is you're taking the worst part of the Catholic Church and shoving it in Japan, because it is just lockstep in rules and orders, and you are not allowed to break that. And if you do, you're admonished.
Yeah. Well, part of it I think is fundamental for intensive practice, right? Like, so when you do sesshin, for example, the oryoki, right, the way that we eat in sesshin, I think is the coolest thing. And when I describe it to people, it makes a lot of sense to me that in sesshin, let's remove all of the decision making that you might have to make, right? Like, you don't have to think about how you're going to hand this bowl to someone. You're going to do it with 3 fingers on top, and they're going to receive it with 3 fingers on the bottom. Like, all these things are laid out for you so that you can focus on being present, or your meditation, whatever, however you want to describe that.
Yeah, exactly. Oryoki is a very ritualized performance of eating.
Yeah.
And everything about it is exactly like you said, of how you hand the bowls, how you receive them, how you place your utensils, and there's really no decision making. It's all been decided for you. Which, if anybody's curious, that's pretty much what monastic life in the Zen temple is. You have no decisions. Everything has been pre-decided, and you're following a schedule and a format, and you have no say in it. Yeah. And that's what a sesshin is. If somebody's curious, a 3-day, 7-day, you're essentially going into, I guess Reb Anderson once called it like a sieve, a grate. And you're kind of pushing yourself through this sieve to see what bubbles up and pops out.
Yeah. What you don't need, it's gonna get all
well.
Left behind.
A lot of times it's things that you were shoving in the locker, you were shoving it in the bucket, hoping it wouldn't come out. And a lot of times during sessions, the teachers often told me that it's like, oh yeah, we're dealing with some explosive issues that are coming up in people, just a lot of stuff. Because I was just one of those guys where I was just gelling through the whole thing and, doing my own thing. And, I was actually very energized because the way that I guess I was doing meditation was very different than most people.
No, that's what I think we talked a little bit about that when we first met, right, online.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about that? So something changed for you when you discovered something. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So even before, well, I mean, I kind of wanted to talk about, since we were talking about this, I want to talk about my introduction to the meditation practice I imagine that you're alluding to. So I want to say this happened before I had that like aha moment and I went to seek out Zen. I found this book and it was online. And this is back in the day of like GeoCities. And, for those of you who are old enough, and like, back. You really got to know how to navigate the internet at that point to get anything good out of it. And, in my teenage years, 13, 14, 15, 16, I had tried meditation. I had picked up a book on, astral projecting or, whatever. I was just into this kind of stuff. And at some point, and I forget when it happened. I forget if it was in the early days of me practicing Zen or even before that, but I found this little manual. It must have been, this big, thin manual. It looked like, if you've ever seen the movie Kung Fu Hustle, or it's like a Kung Fu kind of trope, there's this little book he gets from this guy in an alleyway, and it's like the Buddha's palm or Buddha's fist or something, and it's like, this mystical, magical manual that oh, this is for you, you're the chosen one kind of idea. And this book had that kind of feeling to me, where I never heard anyone talk about it. To this day, you're the only one in the Zen circles that I've heard bring it up or bring up Zenmar. But yeah, it was called Dark Zen, and it was a mystical, I forget the whole name of it, but it's Dark Zen, a mystical manual, or do you know the name off the top of your head, the title?
Just the mystical teachings of Dark Zen, yeah.
Right. And so for me, I was like, oh, that's cool, right? This is so cool. And so when I really started getting into sesshin and doing these practices, of course, in Soto Zen, and even more so, I think maybe in our lineage, is very, very little instruction given. It's like, if you want something to do, count your breath. Otherwise it's shikantaza, which is like, and even like, I feel like even more so with my teacher style, she's even more hands off. She's gonna say like, oh, you're fine, you can't mess it up. And so for me, I was kind of sitting there thinking like, no, I feel like I can mess this up. Like, I feel like, because I hear these stories about these monks in Japan, Rinzai, and they're sitting and they're sweating and they're yelling. And I felt like there was maybe a happy but in between, where I could feel like I'm perfect and I'm embodying the realization that, in this moment I'm good. Like, I don't need to do anything. And this is, to me, part of Buddha's teaching, or that transmission, is that like you're okay. Like, you're good. And so but also I wanted to do something a little more, right? And so that the meditation practice I learned from that book was, the best way I can describe it was to be before your experience, right? So it's like, if you're sitting and you're breathing, you can feel your breath going in and out. So you can be the one breathing, but can you be the one that's prior before that?
Yeah.
And so when I would imagine that way of just kind of being in my body, or having the experience, that's very energizing. And that's how it was described in the book, is that Soto Zen specifically maybe is like waiting for a bus, right? You're just sitting there and you're waiting, and it's very boring, kind of. And this was much different. I felt like I was tapping into something, opening up things, and being energized by this tapping into, which to me, it feels like you're tapping into more of your authentic nature, which is it comes before all these experiences.
The book calls it the buddhic light.
Yeah.
And
how cool is that?
it's something that it's very hard to describe. Because I had even before we wrote the book Dark Zen, I was kind of calling it, the light behind me. And because I literally was in the meditation halls, and I was just like, well, I'm not supposed to focus on my thoughts, let them go. And then I just sort of said, well, what's before the thought? What is prior to the thought? What is prior to, this organic piece of meat knowing? And that was kind of a funny thing, because suddenly I'm like kind of rising above my head, and I felt like there was this light shining behind me and just radiating, and everything just started to like glow. And I was, before I know it, the little bell was being dinged, and it was time to get up and go eat cookies and have a lecture. And I was coming out of there all energized, like ready to go, like I'm ready to go. And everybody else was coming out of there all glassy-eyed and just dazed and distorted and needing to go find the coffee. And I'm like, oh, I've had enough coffee.
Yeah.
Because it's like being plugged into the cosmic universe. And I tried to explain this to the teacher at the time, who they were just like, well, yeah, you just keep going, because I don't think they had a clue what's going on. So yeah, we've kind of the same kind of experiences that you had, getting very energized and opening up tons of different avenues and possibilities. Later, we started to talk about this this priorness more as the intuitive mind. What is there before the formation of the thought? What is there before the the thought comes that engages the tongue and the mouth to form the word.
Sure. Yeah, I call
And
it the pro-conscious, right? So
the
that
pro-conscious.
we talk about subconscious, and I think so. I at one point I reframed subconscious to pro-conscious because that makes a lot more sense as to what's actually happening. So if I let's say I say something to you and it triggers some kind of event or some kind of reaction from you, and then we have some kind of a, and you say to me, well, why did you say it like that? Well, why did you use that tone, or whatever that thing. I would say, oh, I was just talking subconsciously. I guess I had a resentment maybe that came out in that moment. And so that function is actually, it's not underneath, it's not sub, it's actually before, right? It's
Mhm.
pro, it's ahead of. And I think that's what we're tapping into in intuition, pro-conscious, or, some people frame it as your higher self. They say, oh, I'm connected, or Shunryu Suzuki would call it big mind, right?
Yeah, big mind. Yeah.
And this idea is how do we frame things? It matters in such that I want to communicate to someone. If they believe in aliens, then I'll talk about aliens, because I want to frame it in a way that they're going to understand. But we're all talking about that, right? What's coming before, or what's informing us in our experience, a little bit ahead of the curve, right? And I feel like when I was a kid, that's what I felt like I was missing, that connection. I knew it was there. I didn't know how to interact with it in any way. But I figured somebody must know. We've been around for a while, right?
Exactly. It's like one of the things we were discovering when we were writing the book was it's all there. I mean, all the instruction in Zen has always been right in front of our faces.
Oh, it's been everywhere.
It's just that it's just a little bit obfuscated, a little bit coded, and we tend then to let our own agendas, our own designs and schemes and plots kind of filter in there, and it starts to twist the teachings into something they're not.
Absolutely.
And that is something that I kind of been seeing within the current aspects of modern Zen, is that a lot of things have been twisted to become something they're not. This idea that sitting is being Buddha is a twist, and it's like, well, then if that's the case, then every time I sit down, I'm Buddha. That don't make no sense. So it's obviously that is not the correct answer or the correct view. But I'm just curious, since those times, what has been your current practices at within the last few years?
Wow, it's changed so much. So in my 20s, like I said, I had this kind of glorified idea of what I needed to do to get, to feel good and to do this practice the right way, right? I mean, really, I was chasing after this idea of enlightenment. Wow, so cool. I remember talking to my teacher, Angie, at some point about this, and I was like, I just need to sit more. I don't sit enough. I really should be sitting every morning and every night. That's like, how can I call myself a Zen guy if I don't meditate at least twice a day? And I remember she said to me at the time, and this really upset me. She's like, well, have you ever thought about not sitting? And at the time, I got so upset. I didn't, get upset at her because, come on, she's an old lady. I'm not gonna get upset at her. But I was like really insulted. Basically what I felt like she was saying to me was, have you thought about not doing it? Like, doesn't she see that I love Zen, that I need to do this, that this is a key and fundamental aspect of me in this life? Is I'm a Zen guy. I'm basically, as monk as I can be without living on the thing. Like, how could you tell me that I shouldn't sit, or, how dare you? Right. Much later, I came back to her and I recalled that conversation that I had, and I just kind of laughed about it. And I was like, at the time I couldn't comprehend, but that was actually some of the most useful things she's ever said to me, because what she was asking me to do was to look at the life that was in front of me, the life that I had, the life where I was going through a divorce, the life where I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do for work, and the life that was very unpleasant in some ways. It was not living on a mountain, having my meals cooked for me and being able to just, zen out all the time. It was very challenging, and I was kind of wild, and these lessons were intense. And it's like, well, surely, I could find my answer by sitting more. But no, it wasn't that. And so, without getting too much into my entire story, there was a point in my life where I just kind of surrendered. I didn't give up, but I surrendered to, I mean, really, it was like what I learned on the mat. And what I learned on the mat was that more or less that I'm good. I don't need to put too much of my own planning into what's going on. I can kind of just respond and be present. And so things started to shift for me, and now my practice is very different. I read at one point, or I forget who told me this, or I read it or something, but essentially it's like you practice enough Zen really hard and with a lot of like, I'm gonna go get it, and eventually it just kind of gets in you. And at one point I realized that I started checking in or returning home, or however you want to describe that experience of, you're daydreaming and then you come back into your body, right? That little tiny kensho, or that little tiny moment of presentness. I realized I was doing it a lot more, a lot more often and very naturally. And so it's really shows up in my life a lot. I love driving. Driving is fantastic. I feel like when I'm driving, I have a lot of really, it's just a really nice time for me to kind of check in with myself and be present. In conversations a lot, I find myself doing this as well, to the point where it's almost second nature or first nature, I guess, to just feel what's happening, like pay attention to what's going on rather than what I'm creating. And I do
be intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. And I do one thing that I really enjoyed as a practice itself is I do something called flow arts. And so I'm a flow artist. It's essentially, if you've ever seen fire spinning is part of flow arts. And so we use different props, and it's kind of like I describe people when they see me out at a park or something, like, what are you doing? It's kind of like a mix of martial arts, dance, and meditation. And for me, it leans more on the meditation side. I use it as a means to, instead of sitting, which I do enough of already. I think a lot of us do. And so I do sit, I have a mat here that I do use when I feel called to it. But really, for me, putting on some headphones and dancing and playing with these props is just such a great way to get in touch with my body, to keep my energy flowing through my body by movement. And I would say that's really evolved into what I used to think I should be doing, right? I used to think in my 20s, you got to sit.
Gotta sit. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's like, if I'm feeling off, if I'm feeling kind of, I'm like, you got to flow.
Gotta flow.
Yeah.
I think that one thing in the West that has happened is, I kind of remember during the 80s, that's when I started Zen. And that was back in the Kung Fu craze, the martial arts being brought over. They called it the Japanese invasion back then, where everything Japan was just coming over. And all the movies back then, from Buckaroo Banzai to Karate Kid, all those movies were coming out. And so that was part of the Japanese invasion. And a lot of that, what was happening was martial arts was all coming over here. And with martial arts, the kendo, the karate, and the various other schools, came Zen.
Yeah.
And people were treating Zen in the 80s like a martial art.
Mm.
It's like, oh yeah, I dropped the kid. It's like you would drop the kids off at the karate school and do the karate, but then on Sundays you drop yourself off at the Zen school and do Zen. It was sort of like they called it martial arts for adults.
That's funny.
And that's sort of where I kind of see that this compartmentalizing started happening, and I also start to see that even though we were learning these Japanese customs and skills, we really never went beyond them as into adapting them into our own thing. And one of the things that was often pointed out was that Japan has a lot of arts, the calligraphy, the tea ceremonies, and there's everything from the archery, where it kind of
Kobun
stems
Roshi
from Zen.
was an archer also.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of what they call the missing practices, and we kind of talked a little bit about that in when in the Zen Center days when I actually went to those places. was that everybody was so focused on the sitting, and if they were getting it right, it was like they were treating it like a martial arts. Sensei, am I holding my arms right? Have I got my fist closed right? Well, they were treating it like that, like it was a karate school, like as if there's this very particular way you have to do things. And if you do things just right, you're going to get the prize. And, but what was missing, though, I always felt, was the arts, where's the drawing? Where's the creativity? Where's the flow? Where's the intuitiveness that comes from this? And that, in my humble opinion, didn't arrive then, and it has not arrived now. It is still very much still treated as a karate school.
Well, it has for me.
Yeah. Well, so you're definitely have moved Zen off the mat, out of the Zendo into your daily life.
Yeah, it's what we have. I mean, I shouldn't say we have to do it, but that is in the that's what if you're practicing Zen, that's what you're being asked to do, right? Like if you just stay there, if you stay on the mountain, if you stay on the mat, if you think that's Zen and this is my life, then you're missing the whole point. Zen itself as a institution is just a placeholder for the teaching itself. It's just meant to give a place where we can kind of slide that teaching right in there, but it's not the teaching itself, right? Like going to the Zendo and sitting for years on end and chasing sessions all around the country doing all stuff, that has nothing to do with the teaching itself. Nothing.
Yes, exactly.
Literally nothing. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not saying that out of spite or anything like that. It just isn't the teaching. It's not. It has nothing to do with transmission. It has nothing to do with what the Buddha taught. Nothing. And so I think that this is the last session I went to. I remember sitting there, and it's like, man, And then they were sitting around and talking about some passage out of some book, and it wasn't. I was like, oh, God, this book isn't even that great, and like I'm like so bored. And I had said something. I questioned something they were talking about, and the guy explained it to me in this way, who was leading the discussion, where I was like, you're wrong. Like you're just wrong. And but of course everyone's like, oh, this is a teacher, and yes, and so I'm like, okay. So I went outside as everyone's still in there, and I just like walked around and smelled some flowers and just like I just felt like that was more useful for my time than kind of sticking in with this weird, what I felt like was a very strange, and honestly it upset me because I felt like it was very unfortunate, like how special it is to get these people together and for people to have at least the intention of discovering something about themselves or about the nature of them or the reality they live in. Like what a precious moment and precious experience, and for us to have this space to do it in the beautiful land we're on, and then we're all just sitting there talking about this book from some guy that I can't really even challenge because, like, I don't know how to explain it, but I mean maybe you could explain it better. But it's like hard to challenge people in that space sometimes. There's such a unwillingness to be challenged, and it's something I'm looking for, right? Like I want to go do Dharma combat somewhere, like let me stay in your Zendo, right? Like,
good luck with that.
Yeah, I've tried it actually. I tried it at Jikoji. I remember I was at the time I was looking for a place where I could live and stay and practice, and I asked the teacher there, Michael. I was like, is this, like, could I even stay here? Right. Basically, like, is there a possibility for you to host me with that intention to practice? And he's like, we're not that kind of place. And I was like, that's really unfortunate. To me, that's if you don't have the space as a spiritual center like that to provide shelter, at least for people who are very intent on and committed to practicing that practice or kind of living in that path, then that's unfortunate. That doesn't speak well to the health of that center, I would say.
No, that's actually a sign of something else. I found that here in our Western culture, we come from a militaristic background. Line up, um, and be single file, and speak when spoken to, and take a number. So we're not taught to speak back to authority figures. If somebody comes in with a badge, oh, well, they're an authority. If somebody has a name tag or a clipboard, they're in charge. If somebody has a white lab coat on, well, obviously they're smart. They know they're the authority.
I have this scarf on, this pashmina, so that's how you know I'm spiritual.
Yeah, see, that's just it. And the same thing in Zen, you're taught very quickly that the person that has the shaved head and the bib, they're in charge. And you kind of get that because everybody else is deferring to that person for everything.
Yeah.
And I have a talk called the Zen Daddy, which you should listen to. But it's basically what happens is that people defer all their responsibility, all their spiritual practice onto Zen Daddy, the Roshi, in where they're just going to do whatever the Zen Daddy tells them to do. And somehow they're in this desperation of belief, or mostly desperation,
yeah,
that the Zen Daddy is going to cure their suffering.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. And this is where, like, I've talked to other Zen teachers who said that they would wish that things could be more dialogue and discussion oriented, but their students just aren't there. Their students are very needy. The teachers, or the Roshi, or whatever they call them these days, are the Zen Daddy. They are taking care of people more like in a psychological outpatient clinic, which is where it has become these days.
It's part of the reason why I had a hard time with some groups that I was a part of as well, where I go to these sits, and the sitting part was great, but as some of the discussions afterwards, where it's like, I'm having this problem with this guy at work who's and I'm like, what
does that have to do with it? Yeah,
and they would relate a lot of things we're talking about, exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, almost like grow up. This isn't the place for that, right? Like, or at least it shouldn't be. And this is I won't say an issue I had, but okay. So it's like, if your teacher's too strict, no one's going to stick around, right? And then if you're too soft, then you have that kind of situation, right? And I say too loosely, but because I think that everyone's doing great. Like Angie, I wouldn't change anything about my teacher, Angie, right? Like, I think for me, I wouldn't be where I am today without her gentle guidance and reflections. That being said, that's the environment that she cultivated in group setting, was a lot of people who wanted that kind of, soft. And for me, I just want to shake people and be like, yeah, but you're dying also, get real, right? Because, I really appreciated that aspect of the stories come out of Japan about, this is a life or death situation. Maybe we should treat it a little bit like that. If you're investigating into your true nature, take it seriously, until you don't, right?
Well, and that's a very interesting thing, because it's like, sometimes I tell young people, just go for it. If you really want to go for Zen, go for it all the way.
Yeah.
Don't worry about money. Don't worry about what people think. Just go and investigate. There's always a place out there. You can always find some place. It may not be what you think it is, but it will come to you if you are sincere and you are truly seeking. Then the universe will put it in front of you. You just have to be
absolutely.
You just have to brush aside all of your schemes and plots and plans, and then you see it. And I was going
It's
to earlier. I
not
was
a
going
not a
to
small task sometimes. I like you
no,
say,
no,
you
no.
just got to brush aside all that stuff.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm saying it like it's nothing. I know.
Yeah.
It's like it's so hard, and it's kind of funny because it's like my first Zen teacher,
Doesn't
Gary
have to be
Carlson.
hard. It doesn't have to be hard, right?
And
It's actually quite easy.
my first Zen teacher, Gary Carlson, once said, he goes, we kind of asked him, he said, so what is really practice? And then he kind of said, he goes, well, honestly, it's surrendering every day.
Yeah.
He says, I surrender to the Buddha every day. He says, because I realize that I have no control at all over my anything. What happens in the world, what happens around me, what other people do, you know, I could turn the corner and get hit by a bus, sort of mentality, which is that is how fragile life and death is. Literally a hair thinness between it. And he constantly said that. So Reb Anderson, who I greatly respect, often described practice as going that would just pull all of your plans and schemes apart.
Hmm.
And the only way that you were ever going to make it through it was to surrender all of that. And most people can't, and they won't, because you get to a point where you think you've surrendered everything, but you haven't because you're holding certain things back.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, and it's like anything else, we can make it into a practice. I talked a little bit about earlier how I was going through a divorce and all these things were happening, and I gave up. I mean, I didn't give up. I surrendered, right? There's a difference. And so, but I had tried everything. I went to AA. I didn't even think I had that big of a alcohol problem, but I went there anyway. I went and did a 30-day retreat at Land and Medicine Buddha and Jikoji. I did all these different things. And guess what? Nothing I thought of worked. And so at this point, I said, you know what? I have no more money. It's running out. I'm so depressed. I can't function. I'm just going to run out of money, move into my car, and then whatever happens will happen. Whatever shows up
Yeah.
will be the right thing because it's not going to be me trying to make the decision. And then that started a chain of events that really it introduced me to a large group of people that I felt like I had a home with, that I could actually talk about this kind of stuff. They didn't know anything about Zen, but I could talk about this kind of stuff, and they all I mean, they were a bunch of hippies essentially. And so I started working with an environmental nonprofit at that time. But then later in life, I surrendered again. I was shown, hey, you don't need, like, you need to surrender even more. Actually, stop worrying about money. Stop worrying about. I mean, this is where you're saying that you think you surrendered everything. So I actually surrendered the idea of needing money, of needing food, water, shelter, because you can surrender everything else, but the basic things that you need, of course, are food, water, and shelter. Well, yeah, like I understand I need those to survive, but do I need to think about it? Right? Because if you're thinking, okay, well, I need money so I can get this, this, and this. At least I needed the basic necessities. Well, what if you don't? Like, your body knows you need it, the universe knows you need it, but what if you just stop thinking about it, right? And you just put yourself out there? What happens? Well, it turns out what happens is really cool. If you can actually let go of the planning and let go of all those things. I mean, I have this great story where I was hungry. I was in LA, and I wasn't like starving or anything. I was doing fine at this time, and I wasn't suffering. I always had a place to stay. Like, just so you don't get the wrong impression, I was like in some suffering. I wasn't, because I didn't want to. I wasn't trying to suffer. I just didn't want to worry about this stuff anymore. And so I was kind of hungry, and so I went and sat at this little like food court place, and I just sat there, and I was kind of, just sitting, and I was thinking to myself, like, huh, this is really interesting. I don't know how I'll get fed, but I'm super curious to find out how this goes down, And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this lady who was throwing her food away, and so, I was kind of very gently was like, hey, if you don't mind, I'd be happy to finish your plate. It looks like you didn't really touch your food. But if you're uncomfortable with it, that's fine. Just thought I'd ask. It's a lot of food. And she kind of looks at me, and I can see her like kind of click in, and she goes, no, I want to buy you something. And I'm like, oh, no. I was like, no, that's not why I'm asking. I just like, it looked, I don't want to waste the food. It's no problem at all. And she goes, no, please let me buy you something. So, okay, fine. So we go to a place and I pick something out and she goes, no. Pick out one of these expensive ones over here. Like, a meal, right? Because I picked out like a small little, what is it called? You just get like,
Oh yeah, the appetizer.
yeah, and she's like, no, get a whole meal. So I ordered a meal. And so I'm sitting there eating and I was like, that was really cool. Right. And I didn't stay in that state. I didn't want to keep kind of like having people buy my meals for me. I wanted to also contribute and buy meals for other people. But what I learned through that practice was I don't need to really worry so much, even about the things that I think I need to. And what a blessing, it's like my life is not some glorified, thing. It's just but there is a difference. And the difference is I don't worry. I literally, I don't worry. Do I get stressed out? Occasionally I get stressed out. My dog is very stressful. He's a husky and he likes to jump on me and try to run into the street, and he's kind of a pain in my butt. But there's not that extra layer on top of the challenges. It's just the challenge. It's the challenge, and I'm facing the challenges in my life, but I'm not worried because I've been shown through my experience I don't need to. And it's not something you can tell somebody. It's like, hey, look, this is how it works. You start out here, right? If you feel like you said, Mark, if you feel like doing Zen, go get it. Forget about whatever you're doing. If you feel like you want to do it, go all in. Don't worry about it. Like, you'll be fine, right? You start there, and then if you follow that path to to where it goes, then you end up in a place where you're not adding an whole extra layer on top of the challenges that you're all going to face anyway.
Exactly. There's time enough for so much in your life. I've done so many things. It's just incredible. If I was to tell people what I do in my life, they don't believe me because I've had so many amazing adventures.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's fun. The Buddha always said that the three things that a monk doesn't have to worry about is food, shelter, and clothing. Because the universe, if there's humans, if there's people around, those things are always going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's not something that the Buddha ever said worry about. That wasn't the practice. The practice wasn't about obtaining those things. So it's a liberating to put your faith in the Buddha, to put your faith in the Bodhisattvas, put your hands you literally hand over your life to them, and you say, I surrender to you, and then you see what happens.
Yeah.
And it's the ultimate vehicle of faith, because when you truly when you truly relinquish to them, and you truly embark on the path, your faith is absolutely it's a self-testify. It's a self-testimony.
Yeah, it's funny you say faith, because I'm like, it's such a dirty word, isn't it?
And I think it's the four-letter word of religion.
Yeah, is it faith? I think in Zen especially, right? It's like, and I feel like there's actually a better word for it. I don't think that it exists, right? Because if I think of faith, I think of let's say Christianity's faith, right? Which is the kind that it's never proven. It's like, well, you just got to believe and keep believing. And for me, what I was really drawn to about Zen in the first place was basically the idea I was getting from the people who were showing me this was like, well, don't take my word for it, right? Go find out for yourself. And it's the kind of faith that comes through experience, And so I've had these experiences in my life where, like you said, like I was basically this modern day monk in disguise, and I was having these things provided for me that really was like, wow, I don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. I know that I can get out of my own way, and I'll be fine. And so now, if rent's late or something's happening, and it's like, oh. I would say a normal person would be worried about these different things. So no. Like, there's, I'll be fine. And it's because I have an absolute faith, like you're saying, but that's based on my experience. It's based on what I've seen actually, how it works actually.
Yeah,
But it does end up being a faith feeling where it's like I know absolutely.
yeah, it's an iron knowing. It's an absolute knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I know a lot of Zen students, they try to have faith. They talk about wanting to have faith. And it's hard to explain. It's sort of like, well, sometimes you just gotta jump into the fire to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to really do it. I mean, it's like planning and scheming to have faith. That's something different. It's just really just abandoning everything, all your plans and schemes, and just literally saying, "Okay, Buddha, okay, Bodhisattvas, what happens happens," and not, and it's truly abandoning those things, and that is very hard, especially with Zen students. And it's very hard when you go to a Zen center and you make friends and you have a community and it turns into a psychological encounter group where you're telling everybody your problems and you're trying to purge out your whiteness or your political incorrectness or you know your what is the one these days, your white privilege. That's, somebody told me that that they were told to focus on their white privilege.
I was always the way I see things is whatever you focus on will grow, and so I would say
Yeah,
maybe focus on something else. I mean, I do think that privilege is a thing, and I think that it's nice to be aware of how someone who's different than you will have a different experience, and let's be aware that we're all very different, and that you won't know what it's like to be someone else unless you investigate, unless you ask questions,
yeah,
and get to know someone. But I feel like with a lot of things, it's like this, where it's like here, and then it goes all the way over to the other side,
yeah.
and it'll all even out.
Well, we're on the path of the middle way, which is we don't abide in extremes,
Yeah.
and that's what we hope to strive for. So we've been doing this for about an hour now, Forrest. And I think this is probably a good time to wrap up our discussion here. What's in the future for you? Do you have any projects or anything you want to share on this channel that you might be doing?
Um, I don't really know what the future holds. I run a small business with a business partner out here in Austin, Texas. We do solar, residential solar, and so that kind of keeps me busy in that realm of things. I've been doing the flow arts for about 8 years now, and so this year I really decided to put more intention into kind of I guess teaching more, and so I've gone to some local festivals and little gatherings of people who want to learn, and this last one was out here in Austin called Flow Storm, and I got invited to teach. I spin a mini meteor. It's two balls on a rope about this long, and so I taught some classes on that, and I also did a little class on Zen, which was kind of fun, and so I got invited to talk about Zen. And so what does the future hold? We're not really sure. The way, like we're talking about, the way it goes is I could be working on the small business for years, and then one day I might just say, okay, well, now we're doing something else. And I have to be open to kind of what's in front of me, because the possibilities I come up with are very limited. As imaginative and creative as I am, the things that are some of the most beautiful things that have happened in my life are things that I could never have imagined, right? And so I always want to stay open to unexpected, kind of possibilities.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the channel, Forrest, and we hope to check in with you at another time. All right, thank you again, and for this video, we're out.
Thank you so much.